Please
Cassidy
take it.
Finch's
It's all
hands
I
would not
have.
stop
I don't
shaking.
want your money, kid.
$8,000 in cash sat heavy in her palms, bundled with rubber bands smelling like leather and gasoline. Her fingers were numb from the cold, but she could feel every bill, every edge, every possibility contained in that stack of hundreds. 20 feet away, her 7-year-old daughter coughed inside a rusted 2004 Honda Civic. The sound carried through the cracked window and hit Cassidy like a blade between the ribs. Wren had been coughing for 3 weeks now. Not the harmless cough of a child fighting off a cold, but something deeper, something wet and heavy that rattled in her small chest and refused to let go. $8,000 could end this. All of it. The hunger, the cold, the parking lots, the truck stop bathrooms, the nights spent praying that police would not knock on their window and force them to move along to nowhere. $8,000 could buy medicine. Real medicine. Not the expired samples. Cassidy begged from clinic nurses who looked at her with pity. They tried to disguise as professionalism. $8,000 could rent an apartment with heat and running water and a door that locked from the inside. $8,000 could save her daughter's life. Cassidy looked at the money. Then she looked at the Civic. Wren was curled beneath 2 thin blankets in the back seat, her blonde hair matted against a face that had grown too pale over the past month. She was sleeping now or trying to, her small body rising and falling with each labored breath. 11 months. 11 months of living in that car. 11 months of watching her daughter shrink, watching the light dim behind those blue eyes that used to sparkle with mischief and laughter. 11 months of failing as a mother in every measurable way, while fighting with everything she had to keep them both alive. And now this. A black leather saddlebag found half buried in the dead grass beside Route 58, just outside Barstow, California. Expensive, heavy, clearly built to sit on a motorcycle rather than lie abandoned in roadside weeds. Cassidy had been walking the shoulder of the highway at dawn, scanning the gravel for bottles and cans she could recycle for a few cents, when her boot caught the strap and she stumbled. She had almost walked past it, almost left it in the weeds where it lay. But something made her stop, made her kneel down and pull the bag free from the frost-stiffened grass. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was desperation so deep it had become a kind of radar attuned to anything that might hold value, might hold salvation. She had unzipped it, expecting nothing, finding everything. Now she sat in the frozen grass 30 feet from the highway, clutching a fortune she had not earned, and her mind was splitting in two. Take it, one voice said. Take it and drive. Drive until Barstow is a memory. Find a town where nobody knows your name, rent a room, buy rent a nebulizer and groceries and shoes that are not held together with duct tape. Nobody will ever know. Nobody saw you find it. Nobody is watching. But another voice spoke too, quieter, steadier. A voice she had carried since childhood, planted there by a man who had calloused hands and sawdust in his hair, and an unwavering belief that right was right even when it cost you everything. Her father, Dwayne Finch, a construction worker who had raised Cassidy alone after her mother walked out. A man who worked 16-hour days and came home with his back screaming and his hands raw, and still found the energy to sit on the edge of his daughter's bed every single night and talk to her about the things that mattered. He had taught her to read wood grain before she could read books, taught her to feel the difference between oak and maple with her fingertips, taught her to build joints so precise they would outlast the building around them. But more than carpentry, more than any skill with chisel or plane, Dwayne Finch had taught his daughter, and thing above all else, a person's integrity is all they truly own. Everything else can be taken away. Your job, your money, your health. But your integrity belongs to you forever unless you choose to give it away. Cassidy had been 12 when he said those words for the first time. She was 34 now, and she had never forgotten. She had repeated them to herself in hospital waiting rooms while Rowan's body surrendered to cancer. She had whispered them in shelter hallways while Wren slept on a cot too small for a child. She had clung to them like a rope in the dark during every desperate, humiliating, soul-crushing day of the past 11 months. She dug deeper into the saddlebag. Beneath the cash was a leather-bound journal, some photographs, and a small velvet box. She opened the box and felt her throat tighten. An engagement ring. Diamond. Old but stunning, with a setting that spoke of another era, a ring clearly passed down through generations rather than purchased from a jeweler's display case. Someone's history sat in that box. Someone's love story. She opened the journal. On the first page in careful handwriting, property of Vincent Rattler Garrison. If found, call 555-0147. Cassidy stared at the phone number for a long time. She listened to Wren cough in the car. She looked at the money in the buy and the ring in the box, and she felt something tear inside her so painfully she thought her heart might actually be breaking apart. Then she pulled out her phone. 4% battery. The screen flickered. She dialed the number. It rang 3 times. The voice that answered was deep controlled and layered with a danger that made Cassidy's spine go rigid. Who is this? My name is Cassidy Finch. I found a saddlebag on Route 58 near Barstow. There is money inside and a ring. I believe it belongs to someone named Vincent. The silence on the other end lasted long enough for Cassidy to hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. How much money? $8,000. More silence. Cassidy could hear muffled conversation in the background. Someone else speaking in urgent clipped tones. Then the voice returned harder now, carrying an edge of disbelief. You are calling to give it back. It is not mine. You found $8,000 in cash on the side of the road, and you are calling to give it back. It does not belong to me. The voice paused. Cassidy heard what sounded like a hand covering the phone, more muffled words exchanged with someone nearby. Then it came back clear and direct. Where exactly are you? The truck stop on a main street. Barstow, near the underpass. Do not move. We are coming. The line went dead. Cassidy lowered the phone with hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it in the frozen grass. The screen went black. 1% battery remaining, then nothing. She had just given away her only lifeline to call for help if something went wrong. And something she realized with a cold certainty settling into her bones could go very wrong. She walked back to the Civic and climbed inside. The warmth from the heater had faded hours ago, but the interior still held a faint trace of body heat enough to keep the air above freezing. Wren stirred in the back seat. Mama, I am here, baby girl. I am hungry. 2 words. 2 small words spoken in a voice that had lost the ability to complain, that had learned over 11 months that hunger was simply a condition of existence, and that her mother was already doing everything humanly possible. Cassidy reached into the center console. 3 crackers left in a half-empty box. She handed them back without turning around, because she could not let Wren see her face right now. Could not let her daughter see the tears running down her cheeks, the way her jaw clenched against the scream building in her throat. She had just given away $8,000. $8,000 that could have filled Wren's stomach for a year. $8,000 that could have saved them. But she could not teach her daughter to survive on stolen money. She could not build a new life on a foundation of theft and expect it to hold. She could not look into those blue eyes that reminded her so much of Rowan and know that everything they had was purchased with someone else's loss. Mama, are we going somewhere today? Cassidy forced her voice steady. Maybe, baby girl, maybe today everything changes. She did not know how right she was. 2 hours passed. The sun climbed higher but brought no warmth, just pale light that made the desert look even more barren, more hostile. Wren had fallen back asleep and with cracker crumbs on her blanket and her breathing shallow but steady. Cassidy sat behind the wheel with her hands in her lap, watching the highway, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. Maybe the voice on the phone had been lying. Maybe nobody was coming. Maybe she should have taken the money and run. Then the rumble started, low at first like distant thunder rolling across the desert floor. But it grew, deeper, heavier, a sound you felt in your ribs before it reached your ears. Cassidy sat up straight and gripped the steering wheel. They appeared on the horizon in a staggered formation. 1 bike, then 5, then 20. Chrome catching the morning sun engines, growling in unison. A wall of sound and motion bearing down on the truck stop with a purpose that made Cassidy's mouth go dry. More kept coming. 30, 40, 50. They filled the highway like a river of black leather and polished steel, splitting around cars that pulled hastily to the shoulder to let them pass. Truckers slowed to watch. A family in a minivan stared through their windows with a mixture of awe and alarm. 60, 70, 81. 81 motorcycles pulled into the truck stop parking lot in a formation so precise it looked rehearsed. engines idling in a collective roar that shook the ground beneath Cassidy's feet. And on the backs of their leather vests, the same patch repeated 81 times. Iron Reapers, MC, California. Cassidy felt something cold settle into her stomach. She had heard of the Iron Reapers. Everyone in California had. Stories passed around in whispers and warnings, tales of a motorcycle club with chapters across the western states and a reputation for dealing with problems in ways that never made the evening news. The club that law enforcement monitored and ordinary citizens crossed the street to avoid. And she had called them here. She had told them exactly where she was. The lead rider killed his engine and dismounted. He was enormous, 6'4" at least, with a gray beard that hung to his chest and arms that strained against his leather jacket. Tattoos covered every visible inch of skin crawling up his neck and disappearing beneath his collar. His vest bore patches that Cassidy did not recognize, but one was unmistakable. President. He surveyed the parking lot with eyes that missed nothing. They swept across the gas pumps, the diner, the few cars scattered across the lot. Then they found the Civic. Found Cassidy behind the wheel, frozen, her daughter sleeping in the back seat. He started walking toward them. Ren woke up. "Mama, what is that noise? Why are there so many motorcycles?" Cassidy's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Stay in the car, Ren. Do not move. Whatever happens, stay in the car." "Mama, I am scared, I know." "Me too, but it is going to be fine. I promise." Cassidy opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning air. She stood at her full height, which was not much, 5'6" in boots and 120 pounds after 11 months of eating last and eating least. But she planted her feet and squared her shoulders and looked the giant biker dead in the eyes. He stopped 10 feet away. Up close, his presence was almost gravitational. The weight of him, the stillness, the eyes like cold rolled steel that had watched violence happen and had caused violence to happen and carried not an ounce of apology for either. "You Cassidy Finch?" "Yes, sir." He looked her over, took in the unwashed hair pulled back in a ponytail, the jacket too thin for November, the jeans worn through at both knees. Then his gaze moved past her to the Civic, to Ren watching through the window with eyes too large for her pale face. "You are the one who called about Rattler's bag." "Yes, sir." "Where is it?" Cassidy held up the saddlebag. Her hands were shaking and the leather trembled against her grip, but she did not lower her eyes and she did not step back. The biker took the bag. He opened it slowly, methodically, and examined the contents. The cash, the journal, the ring. His expression did not change, but his hand slowed when he reached the velvet box. $8,000. "Yes, sir." "And you called us to give it back?" "Yes, sir." The biker studied her for a long moment. His eyes moved between Cassidy and the car, between the woman standing before him and the child huddled beneath blankets in the back seat. Cassidy could see him calculating, measuring, trying to fit what he was seeing into some framework that made sense to him. "You are homeless." It was not a question. 11 months, Cassidy said. She kept her voice flat. She would not perform her suffering for anyone. "The girl, my daughter Ren, she is 7, and you found $8,000 in cash, and you called us instead of taking it." Cassidy met his eyes. "It was not mine to take." The biker held her gaze for 3 seconds that felt like 30. Then he turned and walked back to the cluster of bikers who had assembled in a loose semicircle behind him. He spoke to them in a voice too low for Cassidy to hear, but she could see the reactions. Heads turning toward her, eyebrows rising, expressions shifting through surprise and skepticism and something that might have been reluctant admiration. She stood alone in the parking lot, shivering, her arms wrapped around herself, waiting for whatever came next. If they decided to simply take the bag and leave, she would have nothing. If they decided she was a threat somehow, that she had seen the money and might talk, she would have less than nothing. The biker walked back. His face had changed, not softer exactly, but recalibrated, as though she had answered a question he had not asked aloud. "What is your story?" "Excuse me, your story. How did you end up here? Homeless with a kid in a car that looks like it is held together by rust and prayers." Cassidy hesitated. She had told this story before. To social workers and shelter volunteers and church charity coordinators, reciting the details until they became just words, sounds emptied of meaning through repetition. But something in this man's eyes told her he was not asking out of obligation or pity. He was asking because the answer mattered to him. I was a carpenter, she said, had my own shop in Phoenix, custom furniture, cabinetry, handcrafted work. I was good at it. And then my husband got sick, lung cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. The biker's expression did not change, but a muscle tightened along his jaw. Insurance, not enough. I sold the business to cover treatment. Sold the house. Sold everything we owned down to the tools my father left me. Cassidy's voice remained steady. She had practiced this, had learned to tell it without breaking. He died anyway. 14 months ago. By then I was broke. Could not pay rent. Could not find work because I had Ren to care for and no money for childcare. Shelters were full, or they separated mothers from daughters, or they had time limits. So we ended up in the car. No family. My father died when I was 20, heart attack on a construction site. He was 60 feet up on scaffolding and felt the pain, but would not stop working because he needed the money. By the time he climbed down, it was too late. Cassidy paused. My mother left when I was small. I do not know where she is. Rowan's parents blamed me for his death. Said I should have caught the cancer sooner, gotten better doctors, done more. They tried to take Ren away from me. I fought them in court and won, but it cost me everything I had left. The biker listened without interrupting. When she finished, he turned and shouted toward the group. Rattler, get over here. A younger man separated from the others. Early 30s, brown hair, muscular build. He had the same intense eyes as the older man, but carried them differently with a warmth underneath the hardness that softened his whole face. Yeah, Dad. Cassidy filed the word away. The older man handed the saddlebag to the younger one. This woman found your grandmother's ring. Everything about the younger man changed. He looked at the bound, then at Cassidy with sudden sharp attention. You found this, yes, on the highway, about half a mile east. It must have fallen off your bike. He opened the velvet box and stared at the ring. Cassidy watched something shift behind his eyes, a crack in the composure that revealed grief so fresh it still had edges. This was my grandmother's. His voice dropped low. She wore it for 60 years. We buried her 2 weeks ago. He looked up at Cassidy. I was bringing this ring home to give to my fiancée. When I got to the chapter house and realized it was gone, I thought I had lost her all over again. Cassidy did not speak. She recognized that kind of pain, carried her own version of it every day. You could have sold this ring for $2,000 easy, the younger man said. Could have fed your kid for months. It was not mine. The money then, $8,000 cash. You could have disappeared. It was not mine, Cassidy repeated. The silence between them stretched tight. Then the younger man reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and counted out $500 bills. No. Cassidy held up both hands. I did not do this for a reward. I know. That is exactly why I am giving it to you. He extended the money toward her. Cassidy did not take it. The older man spoke. His voice carried an authority that made the air around them feel heavier. What would it take? Cassidy turned to him. What? For you to accept help? What would it take? Cassidy looked at the enormous biker with the president patch and the steel-colored eyes, and she said something that surprised them both. Work. If you have work that needs doing, I will do it. I do not take what I have not earned, but I can build anything you put in front of me. Something shifted in the old man's face. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. As though she had spoken a language he had not expected to hear from a stranger. He turned to his son. Tell her about the clubhouse. The younger man nodded. Our clubhouse in Bakersfield caught fire 6 weeks ago. Arson. A rival club decided to send a message. The main hall is gutted. Bar stage tables all destroyed. We need it rebuilt from the ground up. Cassidy felt her pulse quicken. That is a major job. 6 months minimum. Full time. The older man folded his arms across his chest. There is an apartment above our bike shop. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it has heat and running water. School is 3 blocks away. Cassidy could not feel her legs. The cold and the shock and the sudden impossible possibility of salvation were colliding inside her, and she could not sort out which sensation belonged to which. 0 rent until the job is done, the older man continued. After that, we work something out. Fair wage for the carpentry paid weekly. But I am not offering you charity. I am offering you a contract. You build our clubhouse and I pay you for the work. Understood. Cassidy looked at this man she had never met before. This terrifying stranger covered in tattoos and scars who was standing in a freezing parking lot offering her a future. Why, she asked. The question was simple and direct, and she needed the answer before she could take a single step forward. The older man was quiet for a moment. Then he walked toward the edge of the parking lot and looked out at the desert. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Still deep, still rough, but carrying something underneath that sounded almost like pain. 40 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. Cassidy stared at him. My wife died when my son was 3. Cancer. Same as your husband. I spent everything trying to save her, and when she passed, I had nothing. No money, no family willing to lift a finger. I lived in my truck for 8 months with a toddler, stole food to keep him alive, did things that still keep me awake at night. What changed a stranger? A man I had never met. He saw me digging through a dumpster behind a restaurant looking for something to feed my boy. Instead of calling the police or looking the other way, he walked outside and offered me a job. Dishwasher. Minimum wage. But it was enough. It was the crack in the wall that let the light through. He turned to face Cassidy. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the morning sun. That man did not have to help me. He had every reason to walk away, but he did not. And I swore that day if I ever got the chance to do the same for someone else, I would. And I am that someone. You are. But here is the difference, he pointed at Cassidy. That man offered me charity, and I took it because I had no pride left. You just turned down $500 because you would rather work for it. That tells me something about who you are. He walked back toward her and extended his hand. I am Hank Garrison. Most people call me Steele. That is my son Caleb, though the brothers know him as Rattler. He paused. What you did today, returning that bag when you had every reason to keep it, that is the most honest thing I have seen in years. Maybe decades. Cassidy shook his hand. His grip was enormous, rough, calloused in ways that spoke of decades of physical labor and hard living. But it was steady. And in that steadiness, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Trust. Wren's face appeared in the Civic's window. She had been watching everything, her breath fogging the glass, her eyes moving between her mother and the giant man with the gray beard. Hank noticed her, and something happened to his face. The hardness around his eyes softened. The rigid line of his jaw relaxed. For a moment, just a flash, Cassidy saw the young father he had once been. The desperate man in a truck with a 3-year-old scraping through dumpsters for food. Let us get your girl fed, he said. There is a diner inside the truck stop. Breakfast is on us, and I will not argue about this one, so do not trauma him. Cassidy looked at the diner, then at Wren's face in the window. Her daughter was watching with an expression that broke something inside Cassidy's chest, a look of cautious, trembling hope that a child should never have to learn. All right, Cassidy said, breakfast. She opened the Civic's door. Come on, Wren, we are going to eat. Wren climbed out, clutching her blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. She was so thin that the bones of her wrists looked like they might poke through her skin. Her shoes were held together with duct tape that Cassidy had reapplied 3 times this week. She took her mother's hand and looked up at Hank with those enormous blue eyes. Are you a giant? Hank blinked. Then he laughed. A real laugh, deep and full and completely unexpected, from a man who looked like he had been carved from granite and rage. Something like that, he said. What is your name, little one, Wren? Like the bird. Well, Wren, like the bird, do you like pancakes? Wren looked at Cassidy. Her eyes were asking a question she had learned not to ask out loud. Are we allowed? We are allowed, Cassidy said softly. Order whatever you want. Inside the truck stop diner, Wren ate pancakes as though she had never seen food before. She poured syrup with both hands, stuffed her mouth until her cheeks bulged, and made small sounds of pleasure that Cassidy had not heard from her daughter in months. Cassidy tried to eat slowly, tried to maintain some dignity, but her body betrayed her. The scrambled eggs, the bacon, the toast with real butter. Hot food, substantial food. Food that filled the hollow ache in her stomach and spread warmth through her limbs. The Iron Reapers had taken over the entire restaurant. Other customers had hastily paid their bills and departed, casting nervous glances at the 81 bikers who occupied every booth and stool and available square foot of standing room. But the atmosphere was not what Cassidy had expected. There was no menace, no aggression, just men eating breakfast, trading jokes, passing salt shakers across tables. Hank sat across from Cassidy watching her eat. Caleb sat beside his father watching too. Their attention should have made her uncomfortable, but instead, it felt almost protective. "Tell me about the carpentry," Hank said. Cassidy set down her fork. "What do you want to know everything? What you built? How good you were? Where you learned?" Cassidy glanced at Wren, who was too absorbed in constructing a tower of pancake pieces to follow the adult conversation. "My father taught me," she said. "He was a construction worker during the week, but on weekends, he built furniture in our garage. Said it was the only time he felt like an artist instead of a laborer. He put a chisel in my hand when I was 8 years old and spent the next 12 years teaching me everything he knew. How to choose wood, how to read the grain, how to make joints that would hold for 100 years. And you started your own business." After he died, Cassidy's voice went flat and factual. She kept the emotion packed down deep where it could not interfere. "I was 20 when he passed. I took everything he taught me and opened a shop. Finch Custom Woodwork. I had 4 employees at our peak. We built furniture for high-end clients in Scottsdale. Custom cabinets, hand-carved mantels, dining tables that cost more than most people's cars. You were successful." "I was." She paused. "Then Rowan got sick and I learned that none of it mattered. The shop, the reputation though, money in the bank, none of it could buy him another year." "How long were you married?" 8 years. We met when I was 24. He was a nurse at the hospital where I had gone for a broken finger. Workplace injury. He splinted my hand and I asked him to dinner. He told me he was not supposed to date patients. I told him I was not really a patient, just a carpenter who was bad at hammers. Hank's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. We got married a year later. Had Wren 2 years after that. Cassidy stopped. "We were happy. Completely happy. I thought it would last forever. I was wrong." Caleb spoke quietly. "She looks like you. She looks like her father." A woman appeared at the table. Dark auburn hair, sharp eyes, leather vest with patches. She slid into the booth beside Caleb, with the ease of someone who belonged there completely. "I am Jolene," she said to Cassidy, "Caleb's fiancée." She glanced at Wren. "And who is this beautiful creature currently wearing more syrup than she has consumed?" Wren looked up with a chocolate and maple smeared grin. "I am Wren, and I have syrup on my face," Jolene laughed. "I can see that, sweetheart. I think you need a napkin. Or possibly a bath." Wren giggled. The sound hit Cassidy like sunlight through a window. She could not remember the last time her daughter had laughed. "How long has she been sick?" Caleb asked. His voice was careful but direct. Cassidy tensed. "What do you mean the coughing? The color in her face?" "I grew up around people who notice things." "Occupational habit?" Cassidy was quiet for a moment. "Asthma. It has been getting worse because of the cone and the dust in the car. She needs a nebulizer and proper medication and a clean room to sleep in. I cannot afford any of it." Hank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "When did she last see a doctor? 4 months ago. Free clinic in Fresno. They gave us expired samples and told us she needed a specialist." Cassidy's voice went thin and sharp. "Specialist care costs money. Money requires insurance. Insurance requires employment. Employment requires child care. Child care requires money. It is a loop designed to keep you exactly where you are." The table went quiet. Hank and Caleb exchanged a glance that carried an entire conversation in the space of a heartbeat. "What about shelters?" Hank asked. "Full, or they separate mothers from daughters? Or they limit your stay to 30 days and then push you back out into the same situation you came from?" Cassidy shook her head. "The system is not built for people like me. It is built to create the appearance of help without providing the substance of it." Hank leaned back. His eyes were doing that calculating thing again, measuring and weighing and arriving at conclusions he did not share. "You said you were a carpenter. Custom work. Are you still good? I am out of practice, but yes. Woodworking does not leave you. It is in the hands. Could you build a bar, tables and chairs, a stage?" Cassidy felt something lift inside her chest. Something that had been pressed flat for 11 months beginning to unfold. "If you give me the right materials and the tools to work with, I can build anything." Hank nodded once, a single decisive motion that seemed to settle something for him. Then here is what is going to happen. You are going to follow us to Bakersfield. You are going to look at the mall and look at the apartment. If you want it, it is yours, and you earn every bit of it with your own hands. Hank, I do not know what to say. Do not say anything. Just decide, in or out. Cassidy looked at Wren. Her daughter had stopped eating and was watching the exchange with solemn attention, understanding perhaps not the words, but the weight of the moment. And Cassidy said, "We are in." Hank stood. He addressed the room without raising his voice, but every man in the diner heard him. "Mount up. We are riding." The diner erupted into motion. Bikers threw cash on tables, grabbed jackets, headed for the doors. Cassidy scooped Wren up and followed, moving through a river of leather and chrome and Uncherian in Orsui toward the parking lot. But when she reached the Civic, 4 bikers were standing around it with expressions ranging from concern to outright pity. "This thing is not making it to Bakersfield," one of them said, a thick man with a shaved head and forearms like bridge cables. "Transmission is gone. Tires are bald. I am amazed it made it this far." Cassidy felt the hope deflate in her chest. "It is all we have." Hank appeared beside her. "Leave it. We will tow it later. But how do we get there?" "You ride with us." Cassidy stared at him. On a motorcycle with Wren, Jolene stepped forward. She had a second helmet in her hand and a smile that was both warm and absolutely confident. "I will take Wren on my bike. She will be safe with me. I grew up riding before I could walk." Cassidy looked at Jolene, at the helmet, at her daughter. "Mama, please." Wren was staring at the motorcycles with an expression of pure wonder. "Can I ride one?" "Please." Cassidy looked at the 81 bikers surrounding them. Men she had been taught to fear. Men who the evening news portrayed as criminals and predators and a danger to decent society. Men who in the past 2 hours had shown her more humanity than anyone had in 11 months. She knelt down and took Wren's face in both hands. "You hold on tight. You do exactly what Jolene tells you." "Understood?" Wren nodded so fast her whole body vibrated. "Understood." Jolene helped Wren onto the bike, settling the girl in front of her with the helmet slightly too large on her small head. Wren gripped the handlebars with both hands and grinned so wide that Cassidy felt tears burning behind her eyes. Hank gestured toward his Harley. "You are riding with me. Have you been on a motorcycle before?" "Never." "Hold on tight." "And Cassidy?" "Yes." "Stop calling me sir. Call me Hank." The engine roared to life beneath her. The vibration ran through Cassidy's entire body, through her bones and her blood, and whatever remained of the fear that had been her constant companion for nearly a year. Wren squealed with delight from Jolene's bike. The sound carried pure, bright, uncontainable joy through the cold morning air. And 81 Iron Reapers with a homeless carpenter and her daughter among them rolled out of Barstow in a thundering convoy that shook the windows of every building on Main Street. Cassidy held on to Hank's leather vest and watched the desert blur past at 70 miles an hour. The wind cut through her thin jacket, but she barely felt it. Wren's laughter, carried from Jolene's bike ahead, carried on the wind like something weightless and impossible and utterly real. Cars pulled to the shoulder to let them pass. Truckers sounded their horns. For 11 months, Cassidy had been invisible. A woman the world stepped over on sidewalks, avoided eye contact with, in parking lots, pretended not to see in shelter lines. She had shrunk until she occupied almost no space at all. Now she was riding with the most feared motorcycle club in California, and the world was getting out of their way. "You doing all right back there?" Hank shouted over the engine. "More than all right. First time on a bike, and you are not shaking. Most people grip so hard their knuckles crack." "I have spent 11 months being afraid." Cassidy pressed her words into the wind. "I am tired of it." Hank did not answer, but she felt something change in his posture. A slight nod of the head, a settling of the shoulders. Recognition, perhaps. Respect. They rode for 2 hours through the California desert, through landscapes so vast and empty they made Cassidy feel simultaneously tiny and infinite. The convoy moved as a single organism, 81 engines synchronized into a rolling thunder that could be heard for miles. They stopped once for gas at a station outside Bakersfield. Wren sprinted toward Cassidy the moment Jolene helped her off the bike. "Mama, Mama, did you see me? I was riding a motorcycle. A real motorcycle." Jolene let me hold the handlebars for 1 second when we went slow. She said, "I am a natural." Cassidy knelt and pulled her daughter into an embrace that she never wanted to end. I saw, sweetheart. You were incredible. Caleb appeared beside them and handed Cassidy a bottle of water. Drink. You look like you are running on fumes. She took the water and drained half of it before she realized how desperately thirsty she had been. Can I ask you something? Caleb said. Yes, that morning when you found the sheet. What went through your head, honestly? Cassidy was quiet. Then she said, honestly, I thought about keeping it. For about 30 seconds, I held that money and I thought about what it could buy. Medicine for Ren, a roof over our heads, food that was not stale crackers. What stopped you? My daughter's face. Cassidy watched Ren skip toward the convenience store with Jolene. I imagined having to tell her someday how we survived, and I could not imagine telling her that her mother was a thief, no matter how justified the reasons. Caleb nodded slowly. My grandmother used to say that character is what you do when nobody is watching. My father said the same thing. Different words, same meaning. What happened to him? Heart attack. Working a construction site 60 feet up on scaffolding. He felt the pain in his chest, but he would not stop because he needed the hours. By the time he climbed down, it was too late. Caleb was quiet. He died providing, Cassidy said. He would have hated dying any other way. He sounds like a good man, the best man I have ever known. Honest, hardworking, never had much, but he had his integrity. And he passed that down to Mom. Cassidy touched the pocket of her jacket where she kept a small photograph of Dwayne, creased and faded, but always with her. Everything I did this morning, the phone call giving back the money that was him, his voice in my head telling me to do the right thing, even when the right thing feels impossible. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out the velvet box. He opened it and looked at the ring. My grandmother was the same way, toughest woman I ever knew, raised 6 kids on her own after my grandfather died. Never took charity, never complained, just worked and sacrificed until all her kids were grown. And this was her ring. My grandfather gave it to her on their wedding day. She wore it for 60 years. When she died 2 weeks ago, she wanted me to have it. Caleb's voice caught. I was going to propose to Jolene next month. When I realized the ring was gone, I felt like I had lost my grandmother all over again. Cassidy put a hand on his arm. I am glad I could give it back. Caleb looked at her with eyes bright with held-back tears. You gave me back more than a ring, Cassidy. You gave me back 60 years of love. They stood together in the gas station parking lot, 2 strangers who had become something else in the span of a single morning. The desert wind blew cold around them, but neither moved. Hank's voice broke the moment. We are burning daylight. Let us move. Cassidy climbed back onto Hank's bike. Ren returned from the store with chocolate on her fingers and a smile that could illuminate the darkest corner of the darkest night. Jolene settled her onto the bike with practiced ease, and the convoy rolled out once more. 30 minutes later, they arrived at the Iron Reapers clubhouse in Bakersfield. Cassidy felt her carpenter's eye activate the moment she saw the building assessing damage, the way a doctor assesses a patient. The front half was intact, a large structure with high ceilings, solid bones, a parking lot that could hold 100 bikes. But the back half was devastation. Charred beams clawing at the ski, collapsed walls exposing the interior to wind and weather. The smell of smoke still embedded in every surface, even weeks after the fire had been extinguished. Arson, Hank said as they dismounted. Rival Club thought they could send us a message by burning down our home. Cassidy walked toward the wreckage without being invited. She moved through the debris with the focused attention of someone who understood buildings on a molecular level, who could look at a charred support beam and know whether the fire had compromised its structural core or merely scarred its surface. She knelt beside a blackened column and pressed her palm flat against the wood, felt the grain beneath the char, tested the density with her knuckles. The bones are sound, she said. The fire burned hot, but not long enough to destroy the structure. The damage is all surface and interior. Everything underneath is salvageable. Hank watched her with an expression that Cassidy could not quite read. Part surprise, part something deeper. So it can be rebuilt. It can be rebuilt better than it was. Cassidy stood and looked around the gutted hall. In her mind, she was already seeing it, not as it was, but as it could be. A bar crafted from reclaimed oak, long and curved with hand-carved details that would make every man who sat there feel like he belonged to something permanent. A stage with proper acoustics and reinforced flooring. Tables and chairs, each one unique, each one bearing the mark of hands that knew their craft. This could be extraordinary, she said quietly. Not just repaired, transformed. What would you need materials? Good wood, not contractor-grade lumber, real oak maple walnut, quality hardware, proper tools, and time. 6 months working every day. Money is not the problem. Time is. We need this done. I can work 12-hour days, longer if I can find someone to watch Ren after school. From behind them, Jolene spoke. I will do it. Cassidy turned. Jolene was standing in the doorway with Ren on her hip, the little girl's arms wrapped around her neck. I work from home most days, Jolene continued. I can pick Ren up from school, help with homework. Keep her company until you are finished for the day. She smiled at Ren. Besides, someone needs to teach this one how to French braid. You clearly have not gotten around to it. Relief hit Cassidy so suddenly it felt physical, a pressure releasing behind her sternum that she had not known she was carrying. Hank walked to the apartment above the bike shop, led Cassidy and Ren up the external staircase to a metal door with hinges that creaked when he pushed it open. The apartment was small, living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The furniture was old and mismatched. The paint was peeling. The linoleum floor had seen better decades. It was the most beautiful thing Cassidy had ever seen. Ren broke free from Cassidy's hand and sprinted into one of the bedrooms. Mama, look. A bed, a real bed with blankets and pillows. Cassidy could not move. Her boots were rooted to the threshold, her body refusing to carry her forward into a future she was not yet sure she deserved. Hank spoke from behind her. It is not much, but it has heat and running water and electricity. Fridge is stocked. Jolene went shopping yesterday when I called ahead from the truck stop. You called ahead. After our conversation, I knew. Cassidy finally found her voice, but it came out fractured, splintered by 11 months of holding herself together with nothing but willpower and her father's words. Why are you doing all of this? Hank walked to the window and looked out at the burned clubhouse below. Because 40 years ago, a stranger opened a door for me when every other door was closed. And I have spent every year since then waiting for the chance to open one for someone else. He turned to face her. But you are not a charity case, Cassidy. You are a carpenter who needs a toy, and I am a man who needs a clubhouse. This is business. Cassidy nodded. She did not trust her voice to say more. Hank moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you the full scope of the work. There is food in the fridge, towels in the bathroom. If you need anything, someone is always at the shop downstairs. He paused at the threshold. And Cassidy, welcome home. The door closed behind him. Cassidy stood alone in the middle of the apartment, listening to her daughter bounce on a real bed in the next room, laughing and counting the pillows, and calling out discoveries like an explorer mapping a new continent. And Cassidy Finch, who had not cried in 11 months, because crying was a luxury she could not afford, who had swallowed every sob and choked down every tear, because her daughter needed a mother made of iron, and resolve sank to the kitchen floor and wept. She wept for the husband she had lost, in the business she had built, in the father who had shaped her, in the 11 months of frozen parking lots, in expired medicine, and 3 crackers for dinner. She wept because, for the first time since Rowan died, someone had looked at her and seen not a problem to be solved or a case file to be processed, but a person, a carpenter, a mother, a woman worth believing in. She wept because her father had been right, about all of it, about integrity being the only thing you truly own, about doing the right thing even when the cost seems unbearable. She had found a saddlebag with $8,000. She had given it back. And in return, she had received something that no amount of money could have purchased. A door opened by a stranger leading to a place that felt like it might become home. Cassidy wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stood up. She walked to Ren's door and watched her daughter sprawled across a real mattress with real sheets. Her arms spread wide, her face pure joy. Mama, the bed is so soft. Feel it. Come feel it. Cassidy lay down beside her daughter on the bed. Ren curled into her side immediately the way she always did, fitting against Cassidy's body with the precision of a joint cut by a master carpenter. 2 pieces made to hold each other. Are we going to live here now, Mama? For a while, yes. Would you like that? Yes, Wren's voice was already growing heavy with the first real drowsiness of safety. I like it here. The people are nice. Jolene said she would teach me to braid hair. And the big man with the beard said I could see his motorcycle collection tomorrow. Cassidy stroked her daughter's hair. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Bakersfield, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere below, a motorcycle engine rumbled to life and then faded into the distance. Her father's voice moved through her memory, quiet and certain. A person's integrity is all they truly own. Cassidy held her daughter close and watched the light change, and for the first time in 11 months, allowed herself to believe that the worst was behind them, that tomorrow might actually be better than today. That one honest choice made in a moment of impossible desperation had set something in motion that even she could not yet fully comprehend. Cassidy Finch had found a saddlebag on the side of the road. She had given it back. And the road ahead, for the first time in a very long time, looked like it might lead somewhere worth going. The first morning in the apartment, Cassidy woke before dawn, not from habit but from the silence. 11 months of sleeping in the Civic had trained her body to startle at every sound, every engine passing on the highway, every tap on the window that might be a police officer telling them to move along. But this morning there was no highway noise, no rumble of trucks, no wind cutting through gaps in the car's weather stripping. Just silence and warmth and the sound of Wren breathing steadily in the next room. Cassidy lay still for a full minute, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the dream to collapse. Waiting to feel the cold creep back in, to hear the rattle of the Civic's engine struggling to keep the heater alive, to smell the stale air of a car that had become both coffin and cradle. But the ceiling stayed solid above her. The blankets stayed warm around her. And when she turned her head, she saw a kitchen through the open door. And in that kitchen, a refrigerator that hummed with the quiet confidence of a machine that contained actual food. She got up. She showered. Hot water. As much as she wanted for as long as she wanted. She stood under the stream until her skin turned pink and the mirror fogged, and the 11 months of grime and exhaustion and despair swirled down the drain in gray rivulets. Then she dressed in the cleanest clothes she had tied her hair back and went downstairs to the ruined clubhouse to begin the work she had promised to do. The damage was worse in daylight. What the evening shadows had softened, the morning sun exposed with brutal clarity. The main hall was a skeleton of charred beams and collapsed drywall. The bar had been reduced to a mound of blackened debris. The stage was a hole in the floor. Every surface was coated in a film of soot and ash that tasted like failure. Cassidy spent the entire first day measuring. She moved through the wreckage with a tape measure and a notebook, crawling over debris, ducking under damaged joists, pressing her hands against every surface to feel what the fire had done and what it had spared. Her notebook filled with numbers and sketches, dimensions and load calculations, material estimates, and structural assessments. By evening, she had a plan. Not just a repair plan, but a vision. The bar would be the centerpiece, a massive L-shaped structure built from reclaimed oak with hand-carved panels depicting scenes she had not yet decided on, but knew would come to her once the wood was in her hands. The stage would be elevated and reinforced, capable of holding a full band and a crowd of dancers. Tables and chairs throughout, each one unique, each one crafted with the attention that separated furniture from art. She presented the plan to Hank that night, spread her notebook across the table in the apartment while Wren ate spaghetti in the next room, slurping noodles and watching cartoons on a television that still felt like a miracle. Hank studied the drawings without speaking. He turned pages slowly, examined details, traced the lines of the bar with his finger. "This is not a repair," he said finally. "No, this is a rebuild. Better than what you had before." Cassidy kept her voice level and professional. She was not asking permission. She was presenting a proposal from one craftsperson to a client. If you want someone to patch the holes and slap up drywall, you can hire a contractor for half the cost. If you want something that will last 50 years and make every person who walks through the door, feel like they belong to something permanent, then this is the plan. Hank looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Do it." The materials arrived 3 days later. Cassidy had submitted her list to Hank without apology for the cost, and he had not flinched. Quality oak, maple, and walnut from a lumberyard in Sacramento. Hardware from a specialty supplier in Los Angeles. Tools that made Cassidy's hands ache with longing the moment she lifted them from their cases. A table saw with a fence so precise it could split a hair. Chisels ground to edges that caught the light like glass. Clamps and planes and files and levels, each one a small perfection. She set up her workshop in the undamaged portion of the clubhouse and began. The bikers watched her. That first week, there was always someone leaning in a doorway or sitting on an overturned crate, observing as Cassidy selected her first piece of oak and ran her hands along its surface, reading the grain, the way her father had taught her, listening to the wood with her fingertips. Some of them watched with curiosity, some with skepticism that they did not bother to hide. And one, a massive biker named Sledge, who stood 6'5" with a shaved head and tattoos covering every visible inch of skin, watched with something closer to open contempt. On the third day, Sledge approached her while she was setting up the table saw. "So you are the carpenter." Cassidy did not look up from her calibration. "I am." Sledge folded his arms. He had forearms like concrete pillars and hands that looked capable of bending steel pipe. Never seen a woman build anything bigger than a bookshelf. Cassidy finished her adjustment. She straightened and looked at him. The top of her head barely reached his collarbone. "Then you have not been paying attention," she said. She turned back to the saw, fed a length of oak through the blade, and produced a cut so clean and straight that it looked machine-made. Then she picked up a chisel and began working a mortise joint, her hands moving with a speed and precision that came from 20 years of practice from a childhood spent in a garage with sawdust in her hair and her father's voice guiding every stroke. Sledge watched. He did not leave. He did not speak. But Cassidy could feel his skepticism shifting as he observed her work, could feel the silence around him change from dismissive to attentive. She finished the joint, fitted the tenon into the mortise. The pieces slid together with a whisper-type precision that needed no glue, no fastener, just the perfection of the cut itself. Sledge stared at the joint for a long time. Then he walked away without a word. The next morning he was back, this time with coffee, 2 cups. He set one beside Cassidy's workbench and sat down on his crate. "My daughter was sick when she was 7, he said. "Leukemia. We spent 2 years in hospitals watching her fight something no child should have to fight." Cassidy stopped working and looked at him. "She is 16 now, healthy, happy, driving me insane with eising me up and all the things fathers are not equipped to handle." Sledge's voice was rough gravel, but beneath it, Cassidy heard the particular tenderness of a man who had stared into the abyss and found a reason to step back from the edge. The point is, things get better. Sometimes it takes longer than you think. Sometimes it takes a miracle. But they get better. Thank you. Do not thank me. Just build something worth building. The brothers respect someone who earns their place. He left, but the coffee kept appearing. Every morning without fail, a cup beside her workbench. And gradually, Sledge's silent presence became a kind of endorsement that the other bikers recognized. If Sledge respected her, there must be a reason. Cassidy worked 12 hours a day, sometimes 14. She arrived before dawn and worked until her hands cramped and her back ached and the sawdust in her lungs made her cough. The clubhouse consumed her. The bar alone took 3 months, 20 feet of reclaimed oak that she shaped and carved and sanded and shaped again until every surface spoke. The panels depicted eagles in flight and open highways vanishing into mountain horizons, and the Iron Reaper's insignia rendered in such layered detail that Hank stood before it for 5 full minutes without speaking the first time he saw it finished. The stage followed through months 4 and 5, a project that demanded structural engineering as much as artistry. Cassidy reinforced the subfloor to hold a full band, and 100 dancing boots installed acoustic panels she had designed from layered hardwoods, and built the front edge with a subtle curve that projected sound outward into the hall. The tables and chairs came last, each one unique, each one requiring a week of work that a factory could have done in a day, but would have produced something dead and forgettable. By the end of the 5th month, the hall was nearly complete. 6 months of 12-hour days of sawdust in her hair and calluses layered over calluses, and the slow satisfaction of watching something ruined become something extraordinary. Wren started school the 2nd week after they arrived. Cassidy walked her to the building, a 3-story brick structure that looked like it had been standing since the Kennedy administration. Wren clutched her hand tightly, radiating a nervousness that she was trying very hard to disguise. "What if they do not like me? Impossible. You are extraordinary. What if they ask where I live? What if they find out about the car?" Cassidy knelt down on the sidewalk and took her daughter's face in both hands. What happened to us does not define who we are. We went through a hard time and we survived it. That makes us strong. Not weak, not shameful. Strong, Wren nodded, but her eyes were still uncertain. And if anyone gives you trouble, you hold your head up and you come tell me about it. We will figure it out together. That is what we do. Okay, Mama, I love you, sweetheart. I love you too. Cassidy watched Wren walk into the school with her small backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She looked back once, waved, and disappeared inside. Cassidy stood on the sidewalk for a long time after that, watching the closed door, willing the universe to be kind to her daughter just this once. The weeks turned to months, sawdust and sweat, and the slow emergence of something beautiful from something ruined. Cassidy lost herself in the work the way she used to lose herself in the shop back in Phoenix, back when work was joy rather than survival. Her hands remembered what her mind had nearly forgotten, that she was good at this, that she had been trained by the best carpenter she had ever known, that the craft her father had given her was not just a skill, but an inheritance. Caleb visited most evenings, checking on the progress, often bringing food. He would sit on a sawhorse and watch Cassidy work, and they would talk in the easy way of two people who had survived different versions of the same grief. One evening, 3 weeks into the project, he arrived with Jolene. They stood together looking at the bar, which was beginning to take its final shape, the first carved panels catching the workshop lights. "This is extraordinary," Jolene said. She ran her fingers along a carved eagle, its wings spread in mid-flight. "How long did this panel take?" 11 hours. For one panel, the details matter. Cassidy set down her chisel. "If I rush the details, the whole piece suffers. My father used to say that the difference between furniture and art is the last 2 hours of work that nobody asked you to do." Caleb looked at Jolene. "Told you." Jolene smiled. She had a way of smiling that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth, a warmth that Cassidy had come to rely on without realizing it. Every afternoon, Jolene picked Wren up from school, helped with homework, fed her dinner, and kept her company until Cassidy finished working. Wren adored her, called her JoJo because the full name was too many syllables for a 7-year-old in a hurry. Some evenings, Cassidy would come upstairs to find Wren and Jolene curled on the couch together. Wren asleep against Jolene's shoulder while Jolene read from a book of fairy tales she had bought specifically for this purpose. These moments reached a place in Cassidy that she had boarded up after Rowan died, prying the nails loose, one by one. The understanding that family was not limited to blood, that kindness offered without obligation, was perhaps the rarest and most valuable thing in the world. Then everything shattered. Cassidy was working late on a Tuesday night, fitting cabinet doors behind the bar, when Hank walked in. He was not alone. His face carried an expression she had never seen on him before, and it frightened her more than the 81 motorcycles in the Barstow parking lot ever had. "We have a problem," he said. Cassidy set down her tools. "What kind of problem?" "Sit down." They sat at one of the new tables. Hank pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. Two people standing outside a courthouse. A man and a woman in their 60s, impeccably dressed, with faces that radiated the particular coldness of people who viewed the world as a series of contests to be won. Cassidy's vision tunneled. The workshop around her disappeared. The smell of sawdust and varnish vanished. Everything compressed to the two faces on that screen. "That is Warren and Constance," she said. Her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "Rowan's parents. They filed a custody petition yesterday." Hank's tone was flat and controlled, the voice of a man delivering news he knew would cause devastation. "They are claiming you are an unfit mother, homeless, unstable, associating with known criminals. They want to take Wren." The floor dropped out from beneath Cassidy's world. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands and felt the wood grain press into her palms and tried to remember how to breathe. "How did they find us school registration?" "They have been searching for you since you won the first custody case. When you enrolled Wren here, it flagged in the system." "No," Cassidy stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor. "I cannot lose her. She is everything. She is the only reason I am still alive. You are not going to lose her. You do not understand. They have money, they have lawyers, they have connections." Warren was a judge for 30 years. Constance sat on the city council. "They have friends in every courthouse in California. The last time I fought them, it cost me everything, and I barely won by a margin so thin The judge could have flipped a coin. Cassidy. The panic was consuming her. She could feel it climbing up her spine, wrapping around her ribs, squeezing the air from her lungs. Ren's face flashed before her eyes. Ren bouncing on the bed that first night. Ren laughing on Jolene's motorcycle. Ren eating pancakes with syrup on her chin. Cassidy. Hank's voice cut through the spiral. Not loud, but carrying an authority that could silence a room of 80 armed men. She forced herself to look at him. "You are not alone anymore," he said. "Do you understand that you have a home? You have a guayam. You have people who will stand beside you. This is not the same fight you fought before." Cassidy stared at him. The panic was still there, coiled in her chest, but something else was rising alongside it. Something harder, something with edges. She sat back down. She placed both hands flat on the table. She took 3 breaths, each one slower than the last. Then she spoke, and her voice was no longer shaking. "I need Jolene, tonight, and I need the best family lawyers you can find. 3 of them. I do not care what they cost." Hank studied her for a moment, then he nodded. A single motion that carried the weight of total commitment. Done. Cassidy did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table after checking on Ren 3 times, watching her daughter sleep peacefully in the bed she had only recently learned to take for granted, and she planned. Not panicked planning, not the desperate scrambling of a woman overwhelmed by forces she could not control. Strategic planning. The kind of thinking she applied to complex carpentry projects, breaking an impossible task into manageable steps, identifying load-bearing elements and points of failure, designing a structure strong enough to withstand whatever force was applied against it. By midnight, she had a list. By 2 in the morning, she had a strategy. By dawn, she had made 3 phone calls and sent 7 messages and set something in motion that Warren and Constance Pemberton would never see coming. Jolene arrived at 7 with coffee and a legal pad. Her eyes were sharp-focused, carrying the intensity of a woman who had spent years as a paralegal and had left the profession not because she lacked ability, but because she lacked patience for lawyers who valued billable hours over justice. "Tell me everything about them," Jolene said. "Every detail you can remember." Cassidy told her. Warren's 30 years on the bench. Constance's political career. Their wealth, their connections, their absolute certainty that they were better than everyone around them and entitled to whatever they wanted. The way they had treated Rowan, their own son, as a disappointment for marrying a carpenter instead of a doctor or a lawyer. The way they had blamed Cassidy for his death as though cancer was a failure of character rather than biology. "They said I killed him," Cassidy said. "Told the court I should have gotten better insurance, caught it earlier, pushed the doctors harder." As though love and determination could stop a stage 4 malignancy. What about the first custody case? They claimed I was unstable, too consumed by grief, unable to provide. The judge saw through most of it, but it was close. The ruling went my way by the thinnest margin imaginable. And then they disappeared. They stopped calling, stopped writing. I thought they had accepted the court's decision. I thought they had moved on. "They were not moving on," Jolene said. "They were regrouping, waiting for ammunition, and now they think they have found it. The bikers. Yes, an unfit mother living among a motorcycle club with a criminal reputation. That is how they will frame it." Cassidy felt the anger rise again, hot and sharp. "These people gave us a home. They gave me work. They fed my daughter when she was starving. I know that. You know that. But a courtroom operates on perception, and the perception of motorcycle clubs is not favorable." Jolene opened her legal pad. "However, perception can be managed, and I know exactly how to manage it." Over the next 3 days, Cassidy and Jolene built their defense. But they did not stop at defense. Cassidy had learned from the first custody battle that playing defense against the Pembertons meant losing slowly. This time, she would attack. It was Cassidy who found Bridget. She had remembered a conversation from years ago, a night when Rowan had come home late, with a darkness in his eyes that she had not seen before. His cousin Bridget had called him upset, and the story had tumbled out in fragments. Warren and Constance had filed for custody of Bridget's daughter, claiming Bridget was an addict. The accusation was based on 3 months of prescription painkillers following a car accident medication that Bridget had stopped taking on schedule. But the Pembertons had spun it into something monstrous. Rowan had wanted to help. Cassidy remembered that, clearly remembered his anger and his helplessness and the way he had paced their living room saying someone needs to stop them. But Bridget's case had been decided before Rowan could intervene. The Pembertons won. Bridget's daughter was placed in their custody for 2 years before she ran away at 17. Cassidy tracked Bridget down through county records and 3 hours of phone calls from Jolene's kitchen. When she finally reached her, the voice on the other end was guarded and tired in the way of someone who had stopped expecting anything good from the world. "My name is Cassidy Finch. I was married to Rowan Pemberton. He was your cousin." Silence. Then a whisper. "Rowan died." "Yes, 14 months ago. Cancer." More silence. "I am sorry. He was the only decent one in that family. I know. And I am calling because his parents are trying to take my daughter." The silence this time was different. Charged with something electric, something that sounded like recognition and rage, and a door being thrown open after years of being sealed shut. "Tell me everything," Bridget said. Cassidy told her. And when she finished, Bridget said the words that changed the trajectory of the entire case. "I will testify. Whatever you need. Whatever it takes. Those people destroyed my family, and I have been waiting years for someone brave enough to fight back." Cassidy was not just brave enough, she was desperate enough and angry enough and loved her daughter fiercely enough that no force in any courtroom in California was going to stand between them. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a courtroom in downtown Bakersfield. Cassidy arrived in a suit that Jolene had helped her select, professional but not pretentious, the clothing of a working woman who respected the court without being intimidated by it. Across the aisle sat Warren and Constance Pemberton. They looked exactly as Cassidy remembered. Polished, confident, radiating the smug certainty of people who had never lost a fight they had the resources to win. Their attorney was a silver-haired man with a reputation that preceded him into every room and a smile that concealed more than it revealed. The gallery behind Cassidy was filled with Iron Reapers. They had removed their leather vests and dressed in button-down shirts and pressed slacks, but their presence was unmistakable. 200 men filling every seat, standing against the walls, spilling into the quarter. They did not look like bikers today. They looked like family. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with gray hair cropped short and eyes that scanned the courtroom with the precision of someone who had spent decades separating truth from performance. The Pembertons' attorney opened with a portrait of Cassidy that bore almost no resemblance to reality. An unstable woman who had allowed her family to collapse into homelessness. A negligent mother who had failed to provide medical care for a sick child. A reckless individual who had voluntarily placed her daughter in proximity to a documented criminal organization. "Your Honor," the attorney concluded, "Ms. Finch has demonstrated a persistent pattern of poor judgment. She lost her home, she lost her livelihood, and rather than seek assistance through proper channels, she chose to embed herself and her vulnerable daughter within a motorcycle club that law enforcement has flagged as a criminal enterprise. This is not the environment in which a child should be raised." Cassidy's attorney, a sharp woman named Margot Bellwether, whom Hank's money had secured, rose for the cross-examination of the Pembertons' witnesses and then called Cassidy to the stand. The questions began with her background, her training, her marriage, Rowan's illness and death. Cassidy answered each one with the controlled clarity of someone who had rehearsed not the words but the composure required to deliver them. Then the question she had been waiting for. "Mrs. Finch, can you describe how you came to know the Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club?" Cassidy looked at the judge, not at the attorneys, not at Warren and Constance, at the woman who would decide her daughter's future. "On a November morning outside Barstow, I found a bag containing $8,000, she said. My daughter had not eaten a real meal in 3 days. Her shoes were held together with tape. She was coughing so badly I was afraid to fall asleep because I did not know if she would still be breathing when I woke up. I looked at that money and I knew exactly what it could buy. Medicine, food, a room with a door that locked, and then I called the number inside the bag and gave every dollar back. Not because it was easy, because it was right. And because the day I steal to survive is the day I lose the only thing that makes me worth surviving for." The courtroom was silent. The men who owned that bag gave me a job, not charity, a job. They needed a carpenter, and I am one of the best in the state. I rebuilt their clubhouse with my own hands. I earned a home for my daughter through skill and labor. I did not ask for handouts, and I did not accept them. The Pembertons' attorney stood for cross-examination. He approached the stand with the measured confidence of a man who had broken witnesses For 30 years. Ms. Finch, you acknowledge that you lived in a vehicle with your daughter for 11 months. I do. You acknowledge that during this period you were unable to provide adequate medical care for her asthma. I provided every resource available to me, which was insufficient because the healthcare system in this country requires money that homeless people do not have. You acknowledge that you are currently residing in a property owned by the Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club and working directly for this organization. I am residing in an apartment and working as a carpenter. The identity of my employer does not determine the quality of my parenting. The attorney pressed forward. And you see no issue with raising a child among men who have criminal records, who have been investigated by federal law enforcement, who are associated with violence and intimidation. Cassidy looked past the attorney to the gallery. 200 men in clean shirts sitting quietly, respectfully there for no reason other than to support a woman they had welcomed as family. May I tell the court what I see? Cassidy asked. The attorney hesitated. The judge leaned forward slightly. Answer the question, Ms. Finch. I see a problem with people who judge others by appearance rather than action. I see a problem with grandparents who file lawsuits against their own grandchild's mother instead of picking up the phone and asking how she is doing. I see a problem with a system that assumes a man in leather is more dangerous than a man in a three-piece suit. Cassidy pointed to the gallery. Those men saved my daughter's life. They gave us a home when we were sleeping in a car. They gave me work when I could not find employment anywhere else. They have treated Wren with more care and genuine kindness than her own grandparents ever showed her. She turned to face Warren and Constance directly. The polished mask on Warren's face had developed a crack. Constance's jaw was tight. You want to discuss danger? Where were you when Wren was sleeping in a car in 20-degree weather? Where were you when she needed medicine? I could not afford. Where were you when I was working day labor to buy her crackers because that was all we could afford to eat? Cassidy's voice rose, not in hysteria, but in the controlled power of a woman who had spent a year holding back a flood and had finally decided to let it go. You were nowhere. You were too busy blaming me for Rowan's death, too occupied with proving that you were right about me from the beginning, too invested in winning to notice that your granddaughter was suffering. You do not want Wren because you love her. You want her because you want to win. The courtroom was absolutely still. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving. The bailiff stood motionless by the door. Then Cassidy's attorney called Bridget Pemberton to the stand. Bridget walked to the witness box with the careful posture of someone who had spent years learning to carry weight without showing it. She stated her name, her relationship to the Pemberton family, and then she told her story. 5 years ago, Warren and Constance filed for custody of my daughter. They claimed I was a drug addict based on a 3-month prescription for painkillers following a car accident. I had followed my doctor's instructions exactly. I stopped the medication on schedule. There was no addiction. Her voice was quiet but unbreakable. Their attorney friends presented my medical records in a way that made responsible pain management look like substance abuse. The judge believed them. My daughter was placed in their home for 2 years. What happened to your daughter? Cassidy's attorney asked. She ran away at 17. She told me that living with Warren and Constance was like being a trophy in a display case. They did not want her. They wanted the victory. The impact on the courtroom was visible. The judge's expression shifted. She made a note on her pad with deliberate precision. The closing arguments were brief. The Pemberton's attorney tried to redirect focus to Cassidy's homelessness and her biker associations. Cassidy's attorney presented the documented pattern of the Pemberton's behavior. The character witnesses the letters from Iron Reapers members, the photographs of Cassidy and Wren building a life together. The judge retired to deliberate. Cassidy sat in the hallway surrounded by 200 men who had dressed up for her and driven hours to sit in uncomfortable chairs in a building most of them would rather avoid. Wren was with Jolene somewhere outside, spared from the courtroom, but present in the building, her small presence radiating through the walls. 1 hour passed, then 2. Cassidy sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the courtroom door and tried to remember how to pray. The bailiff called them back. Cassidy stood. Her legs were steady. Whatever the verdict, she had fought with everything she had. She had told the truth. She had not compromised, and she had not flinched. The judge entered and sat. She looked at Cassidy, then at Warren and Constance, then at the packed gallery. In the matter of the custody petition filed by Warren and Constance Pemberton regarding the minor child Wren Finch, this court finds as follows. Cassidy could hear her heartbeat in her ears. The petitioners have presented evidence that Ms. Finch experienced a period of housing instability following the death of her husband. The court notes, however, that Ms. Finch never relinquished her responsibilities as a mother. She maintained custody throughout their hardship and took consistent, verifiable steps to improve their circumstances. The judge turned a page. The petitioners have raised concerns about Mrs. Finch's association with the Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club. The court has reviewed extensive testimony regarding this association and finds that the specific relationships Ms. Finch has formed have been overwhelmingly positive, supportive, and beneficial to both her and her daughter. She removed her glasses. Most compelling to this court is the evidence of Ms. Finch's character. Her decision to return a saddlebag containing $8,000 in cash at a time when she and her daughter were homeless and desperate demonstrates an integrity that this court finds both rare and deeply credible. Warren shifted in his seat. Constance's face had gone pale. Furthermore, this court has taken notice of a troubling pattern in the petitioner's history. Multiple custody actions against family members, accusations that appear designed to weaponize the legal system rather than protect the welfare of children. This court will not be used as an instrument of control. The judge straightened in her chair. Her voice carried the weight of a gavel before it fell. The petition for custody is denied. Full custody of Wren Finch shall remain with her mother, Cassidy Finch. Furthermore, any future petitions by these petitioners will be subject to heightened scrutiny and must demonstrate a substantial and verified change in circumstances. The gavel came down. The gallery erupted. 200 bikers surged to their feet, cheering, embracing each other, pounding on the benches with an enthusiasm that made the bailiff reach for his radio and then think better of it. Hank pushed through the crowd and wrapped Cassidy in a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "You did it," he said. His voice was rough. "You won." Cassidy could not speak. Tears were running down her face and she did not wipe them away because her hands were shaking too badly to be of any use. Caleb appeared beside them. "Lawyers are filing for a restraining order. Warren and Constance will not be able to contact you or Wren." Then the courtroom doors burst open and Jolene walked in with Wren on her hip. The little girl's eyes were wide, scanning the room, searching for the only face that mattered. "Mama, Mama, did we win?" Cassidy took her daughter from Jolene and held her so tightly that Wren squeaked. "We won, baby girl. We won." Wren pulled back and studied Cassidy's tear-streaked face with the solemn attention of a child who has learned to read adult emotions with the precision of a survival skill. "Then why are you crying?" "Because I am happy. So happy." Wren wiped Cassidy's tears with her small hands. "Do not cry, Mama. We are together. That is all that matters." Cassidy looked around the courtroom, at Hank and Caleb and Jolene and Sledge, and the 200 bikers who had shown up in button-down shirts because someone they called family was under attack. At the judge gathering her papers with the faintest trace of a smile. At Warren and Constance Pemberton walking out of the courtroom with their expensive attorney, their polished confidence cracked and crumbling. "You are right, sweetheart. We are together, and we always will be." That Saturday, the clubhouse was dedicated. Cassidy stood in the center of the hall she had built with her own hands and watched 300 bikers file through the doors. Not just the Bakersfield chapter. Riders from across California, from Nevada and Arizona, drawn by word of a woman who had returned a saddlebag, rebuilt a clubhouse, and won a custody battle against a former judge with nothing but the truth and the support of men the world had told her to fear. They walked through the hall in silence at first, hands reaching out to touch the bar fingers, tracing the carved panels, eyes moving across the stage and the tables and the chairs, each piece bearing the unmistakable signature of craftsmanship that elevated function into art. Hank took the stage. The hall fell quiet. "Brothers," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the room. Cassidy had designed for exactly this kind of moment, for a voice to fill a space and make every person in it feel addressed. "We gather to dedicate this clubhouse. But more than that, we gather to recognize something extraordinary." He looked at Cassidy, standing near the bar with Wren beside her and Jolene behind her. 6 months ago, I got a phone call from a woman I had never met. She told me she had found something that belonged to my son, $8,000 and a ring worth more than money. She was living in a car. Her daughter was sick. She had nothing. And she called us to give it back. In 40 years of running this club, I have seen men with everything betray their brothers for pocket change. This woman had nothing and she gave back a fortune because that was who she was. I knew in that moment that she was someone worth standing beside. 300 bikers were motionless, listening. And then she did something none of us expected. She did not accept our help. She demanded our respect. She asked for work, not charity. And she rebuilt this hall with her own hands, every table, every chair, every inch of that bar built by a woman who lost everything except her dignity and turned that dignity into something all of us can touch and see and sit at. Hank stepped down from the stage and walked toward Cassidy. This clubhouse is not just rebuilt. It is transformed. It is better than anything we had before. And it was built by someone who earned her place among us in a way that most people never will. He stopped in front of her. The hall was silent. Cassidy Finch, you came to us as a stranger, but you were never a stranger to hard work, to honesty, to the kind of character that cannot be bought or faked. You are family, and this hall stands as proof of what you are capable of. The crowd erupted, 300 voices raised in a roar that shook the walls Cassidy had rebuilt. Men surged forward to shake her hand, to embrace her, to tell her that her work was the finest they had ever seen. Wren climbed onto a bar stool and swung her legs and grinned at everyone who passed. Jolene stood behind the bar, pouring drinks with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Caleb stood beside his father, watching the celebration with bright eyes. Cassidy stood in the middle of it all and felt something she had not felt since before Rowan got sick. Belonging, the deep marrow-level certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, a man approached Cassidy at the bar. He resembled Hank, the same build, the same hard eyes, but with less gray in his beard and more warmth in his expression. "So you are the carpenter my brother cannot stop talking about," he said. Cassidy looked at Hank, who nodded. "This is my brother Leland," Hank said. "He runs a construction company in Phoenix." Leland extended his hand. "I have a proposition for you, major development project, 200 high-end homes. I need a foreman who understands real craftsmanship and is not afraid to hold a crew to a higher standard. The job starts in 3 months. Cassidy felt the floor shift beneath her. "Good salary," Leland continued. "Full benefits, health insurance for you and Wren, 2-year contract minimum with options to extend. Relocation assistance." He handed her a folder. Cassidy opened it. Inside were contracts and numbers that made her vision blur. A salary higher than she had earned at the peak of her own business. Benefits she had not had in years. "You finish the work here," Leland said. "Prove what you can do, and then come to Phoenix and build something even bigger." Cassidy looked at Hank. "Why are all of you doing this?" Hank put his hand on her shoulder. "Because 40 years ago someone opened a door for me, and you have spent the last 6 months proving that you are the kind of person who deserves every door opened wide." Cassidy looked down at the folder, at the contracts that represented everything she had lost and everything she had stopped believing she could ever recover. She looked at Wren perched on the bar stool, chattering to Sledge about her soccer tryouts, while the massive biker listened with the patient attention of a man who had learned that the smallest voices often said the most important things. She looked at the hall around her, the bar she had carved, the stage she had built, the tables and chairs that bore her fingerprints and her father's teachings, in the proof that 11 months of hell had not destroyed what mattered most. "Yes," she said. The word came out quiet but certain, solid as oak. "Yes." Hank smiled. It was the first full, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him, and it transformed his face from granite into something almost gentle. "Good. Now get back to the party. You earned it." Cassidy tucked the folder under her arm and walked back into the celebration. Wren spotted her from across the room and waved with both hands, nearly falling off the bar stool in her enthusiasm. "Mama Sledge says I can be the team mascot when I grow up. Can I be a mascot? You can be anything you want." "Wren, anything at all." Cassidy lifted her daughter off the stool and held her close. Around them, 300 bikers laughed and drank and celebrated in the hall that a homeless carpenter had built from ashes. The sound filled the space she had designed, resonated against the walls she had raised, echoed off the stage she had constructed. Her father's voice moved through her memory, steady and sure. A person's integrity is all they truly own. Cassidy held her daughter and looked out at the family she had found in the most unlikely place on earth, and knew with a certainty that went deeper than bone that the hardest part was behind them. That the door Hank had opened was not closing. That the road ahead, though she could not yet see its end, was leading somewhere worth the journey. The moving truck pulled away from the Bakersfield apartment at 6 in the morning. Cassidy stood on the sidewalk, watching it disappear around the corner, carrying everything she and Ren owned. Not much by most standards. A few boxes of clothes, some kitchen supplies, Ren's stuffed bear and school books, and a set of woodworking tools that Hank had given her as a farewell gift, hand-selected from his personal collection, each one engraved with a small CF on the handle. Not much, but infinitely more than they had possessed 8 months ago, when everything they owned fit inside a rusted Honda Civic, and the sum total of their wealth was 3 crackers in a phone with 1% battery. Ren tugged on her hand. "Mama, I do not want to leave. I know, sweetheart. But Phoenix is going to be good for us. You will see." "But what about Jolene and Sledge and everyone? They are not going anywhere. They are still our family. We are just going to live in a different city." "Promise, promise." Hank's Harley rumbled up beside them. Behind him, a convoy of 30 motorcycles filled the quiet residential street, engines idling in a low collective growl that made the neighbor's cat flee beneath a parked car, the Phoenix escort. 30 Iron Reapers riding with Cassidy and Ren to their new home as though they were transporting something precious. Which Cassidy supposed they were. "You ready?" Hank asked. Cassidy looked at the apartment one final time. The external staircase she had climbed 1,000 times. The window of Ren's room where her daughter had pressed her face against the glass every evening, watching for Cassidy to finish work. The bike shop below where she had learned to drink her coffee black because that was how the Reapers made it, and complaining about the coffee was a faster way to get yourself excluded than insulting someone's motorcycle. Ready. They climbed into the pickup truck that Leland Garrison had sent for them. It was new silver, reliable in a way that felt almost foreign after 11 months in the Civic. That car had finally died 2 weeks after they arrived in Bakersfield. The transmission gave out in the parking lot of a grocery store, and the engine followed an hour later as if they had made a pact. Sledge had towed it away, and Cassidy had watched it go without sadness. That chapter was finished, every word of it written and closed. The convoy rolled out of Bakersfield as the sun crested the eastern mountains and flooded the valley with light the color of warm honey. 30 Iron Reapers escorting a carpenter and her daughter into their next life. Ren pressed her face against the passenger of the window, watching the bikes. "Mama, this is like a parade. Better than a parade. This is family. Do they do this for everyone?" "No, Ren, they do this for us." The drive to Phoenix took 6 hours. They stopped twice for fuel and food, and both times the bikers formed a perimeter around Cassidy and Ren as naturally as breathing. Strangers at gas stations stared. A teenager took a photograph. An elderly couple in a minivan locked their doors. Cassidy watched these reactions without anger or amusement. She had learned that the opinions of people who judge by appearance were worth exactly as much as the effort they put into understanding what they were looking at. They arrived in Phoenix at 2 in the afternoon. The city sprawled before them under a sky so blue and vast it looked like it had been painted by someone who had never learned the meaning of restraint. The air was dry, warm, even in November, carrying the faint scent of desert sage and hot asphalt. Leland Garrison was waiting at the house he had arranged. It was small, single-story, 2 bedrooms with a backyard just large enough for a child to run, and a detached garage that Cassidy immediately assessed for workshop potential. The neighborhood was quiet, family-oriented. A sidewalk and sprinkler street where children rode bicycles after school, and neighbors waved from porches. "Welcome home," Leland said, shaking her hand. "Job starts Monday. Take the weekend to settle in. Thank you for everything. Thank me by doing exceptional work. That is all I have ever asked of anyone." Hank pulled Cassidy aside while the other bikers helped unload the truck. His movements were slower than they had been 8 months ago, his breath heavier after the long ride, and Cassidy noticed these things the way a daughter notices a father aging with a concern she did not voice because she knew he would not want to hear it. "The Phoenix chapter knows you are coming. Their president is a man named Diego. Good man, tough but fair. He will watch out for you." Hank handed her a card with a phone number. "Any trouble, you call him." Any trouble at all, I will. And Cassidy. Hank's voice dropped, shedding the authority and the gravel and leaving behind something raw and honest. I am proud of you. What you built in Bakersfield, the clubhouse, and the life that is something most people never accomplish with twice the time and 10 times the resources. You did it with nothing but your hands and your word. Cassidy embraced him. He was enormous and hard and smelled like engine oil and leather, and the particular dusty warmth of a man who had spent 4 decades riding California highways. But his arms around her were gentle. Thank you, Hank, for opening the door. You walked through it yourself. I just showed you where it was. The bikers stayed for dinner. Someone had ordered pizza. Someone else had brought coolers. The small house overflowed with leather and laughter and the particular kind of loud affection that the Iron Reapers expressed through insults, arm punches, and the occasional headlock that was actually a hug. Ren ran from room to room extracting promises. You will visit. You will call. You will send me pictures of your motorcycle. Sledge, who had driven 6 hours from Bakersfield to be part of the escort, knelt down to her level and promised all three things with a solemnity that would have been comical on a man of his size if the sincerity behind it had not been so absolute. By midnight, they were gone. The house was quiet. Ren was asleep in her new room. The stuffed bear Sledge had given her clutched to her chest, her breathing steady and clear. The dry Phoenix air was already working on her lungs, opening passages that months of coastal dampness and car exhaust had constricted. Cassidy sat on the back porch and looked at the sky. Phoenix stars. Different from Bakersfield stars. Different from the Barstow stars that had hung above the underpass where she and Ren had spent 6 nights wondering if they would survive to see morning. But the same sky, the same vast, indifferent, beautiful sky that covered everything she had been and everything she was becoming. She plugged her phone into the wall charger, a small act that still felt like a luxury after months of rationing every percent of battery, and read the messages that had accumulated during the drive. Texts from bikers she barely knew wishing her well. A voice message from Sledge that consisted entirely of motorcycle engine sounds followed by a gruff, "Take care of yourself," and a photo from Jolene of the clubhouse bar lit by evening light with a caption that read, "You built this. Never forget." Cassidy smiled and set the phone down. She pulled out Rowan's journal. She had not told the full story of the journal yet, not to anyone, because the story was still unfolding inside her and she was not ready to share it. Bridget had given it to her the night before they left Bakersfield, had appeared at the apartment door with a small box under her arm and an expression that mixed grief with something that looked like relief. Rowan gave this to me 6 months before he died, Bridget had said. He asked me to keep it safe, to give it to you when the time was right. Inside the box was a leather journal, soft and worn, and beneath it a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. What is this? Rowan kept a journal through his entire illness. Everything he thought and felt and feared and hoped. And he wrote letters. To you, Ren, one for every birthday until she turns 18. Cassidy had stared at the box. Her hands had not moved to take it. He wanted you to have them, Bridget said gently. He wanted Ren to know him when she was old enough to understand. He spent his last months preparing for the two of you, making sure you would have pieces of him to hold on to. Why did he not tell me? Because you were carrying everything. The business, the bills, his treatment. Ren. He did not want to add the weight of his goodbye to everything else you were already holding. He knew you. He knew you would try to be strong for him instead of letting him be strong for you. Cassidy had taken the box, had held it against her chest and felt the weight of it, the physical weight and the immeasurable weight of a husband's love preserved in ink and paper. Now she sat on the porch in Phoenix and opened the journal to the first page. Rowan's handwriting was careful and deliberate, the penmanship of a man who had spent his career writing patient notes and medication orders and wanted every word to be legible. The first entry was dated 3 days after his diagnosis. I am scared, more terrified than I have ever been. But when I look at Cassidy, when I look at Ren, I know that being afraid is a luxury I cannot afford. They need me to fight, so I will fight. For every minute, for every hour, for every day I can steal from this disease and give to them. Cassidy turned the pages slowly, entry after entry, the progression of his illness documented alongside the progression of his love. Days when the treatment left him too weak to hold a pen followed by days when the words poured out in a flood of hope and determination. One entry stopped her, dated 4 months before he died. Cassidy does not know how strong she is. She thinks I am the strong one. Blah, blah, blah. She thinks that because I smile through the treatments and crack jokes with the nurses and tell Ren that daddy is going to be fine, that means I am brave. But she is wrong. She is the foundation this family stands on. She is the one who works 16 hours and then sits by my bed until I fall asleep. She is the one who holds everything together with nothing but her will and her love. When I am gone, she will need to remember this. She will need to remember that strength is not about never breaking. It is about putting yourself back together every single time. Cassidy closed the journal and pressed it against her chest and sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning, she gave Ren the first letter. They sat together on Ren's bed, the morning sun streaming through the window, and Cassidy helped her daughter with the words she could not yet read on her own. My dearest Ren, today you are 7 years old. I wish I could be there to watch you blow out your candles and open your presents. But even though I cannot be there in person, I am always with you. You are the bravest, most wonderful girl in the world. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, Ren cried. Not the frightened tears of a child in a car, or the confused tears of a child in a courtroom. These were the healing tears of a child receiving a message from someone she had lost proof that love persisted beyond death, that the people we lose continue to speak to us if we are willing to listen. Daddy wrote this for me, Ren whispered. He wrote one for every birthday until you are 18. He wanted to be part of your life, even from heaven. Ren threw her arms around Cassidy's neck and held on with the fierce desperation of someone who understood, even at 7, that some things were too precious to ever let go. I miss him, Mama. I miss him too, Ren. Every single day, they made it a tradition. Every Sunday evening, Cassidy and Ren would read an entry from Rowan's journal together. Sometimes the entries made them laugh. Sometimes they made them cry. Always they made them feel connected to the man whose absence shaped their lives as profoundly as his presence once had. Monday morning arrived, and with it, the beginning of Cassidy's new career. She dropped Ren at her new school, a bright building with playground murals and wide windows that caught the morning sun. Ren hesitated at the entrance, glancing back once with a look that asked 100 questions she had learned not to speak aloud. Cassidy nodded. Go on. Ren straightened her shoulders, adjusted her backpack straps, and walked inside without looking back again. She was getting braver. Cassidy could see it in the set of her small jaw and the way she no longer clung, but instead chose to let go. That was Rowan in her. That quiet courage that looked like nothing from the outside, but cost everything on the inside. The construction site was massive. 200 homes in various stages of completion spread across a tract of desert land that had been graded and divided into streets and lots. Workers moved in organized chaos. Trucks rumbled past laden with materials. The percussion of hammers and saws created a rhythm that Cassidy felt in her chest, the way she used to feel the bass notes of a motorcycle convoy. Leland met her at the site office with a hard hat and a frank assessment. You are foreman of custom work, interior finishes cabinetry, specialty carpentry. 20 men under you. 20. And they are not going to make it easy. Most of them have been doing this longer than you have been alive. They have their own methods, their own standards, and their own opinions about taking direction from someone they have never met. He paused. Especially a woman. Cassidy put on the hard hat. I am used to earning respect. I know, that is why you are here. The crew was exactly as Leland had warned. 20 men ranging in age from late 20s to early 60s, sun-weathered and calloused, and carrying the earned confidence of men who measured the world by what you could build rather than what you could say. They tested her from the first hour, ignored her instructions, made jokes she was meant to overhear about the new boss who probably could not tell a dado joint from a dovetail, took deliberate shortcuts on work she had specified to a higher standard. Cassidy did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not pull rank or demand compliance, or deliver speeches about respect and professionalism. She outworked them. She arrived at the site before anyone else each morning and was still working when the last truck pulled away each evening. She took on the most difficult tasks herself, complex joinery and precision cutting that separated craftsmen from laborers, and she executed them with a speed and quality that silenced conversation every time. On the third day, she rebuilt a set of cabinet frames that one of the crew had installed with joints that Cassidy could see would fail within 5 years. She did not call the man out, did not humiliate him in front of his peers. She simply rebuilt the frames herself using techniques that the crew gathered to watch one by one as the word spread that the new foreman was doing something at Station 12 that nobody had seen before. A veteran carpenter named Griff approached her at the end of the second week. He was in his 60s, lean and leathered, with hands that told the story of 40 years of construction, work in every scar and callus. "Where did you learn to cut joints like that?" he asked. Watching Cassidy finish a mortise and tenon connection that fit together with zero visible gap. "My father taught me, before power tools and shortcuts, the old way." Griff was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather worked like that. I have not seen anyone do it in 30 years. "It takes longer," Cassidy said, "but it lasts forever." That is what my grandfather used to say. From that day forward, Griff became her strongest ally on the crew. He vouched for her methods, supported her standards, and brought the other veterans into line through the quiet authority of a man who recognized mastery when he saw it. By the end of the first month, the resistance had dissolved completely. The crew worked with Cassidy rather than against her, and the quality of their output improved so dramatically that Leland started bringing clients through the site specifically to show off the custom work Cassidy's team was producing. Wren thrived in Phoenix. The dry desert air opened her lungs in ways that the California coast never had. Within a month, she had not reached for her inhaler once. She joined the school soccer team, started art lessons, made friends with a fierceness that suggested she was making up for lost time. One evening, Cassidy came home to find Wren sitting on her bed with a notebook and a serious expression. "What are you working on?" "A letter to Daddy." Cassidy sat on the edge of the bed. "Can I ask what you are telling him?" "Everything about the new house and my school and the bikers." Wren looked up with eyes that carried more understanding than any 7-year-old should possess. "Do you think he can read it in heaven? I think he can read everything in your heart. The letters just help you organize your thoughts." Wren nodded. "I am telling him about you, Mama. About how hard you work and how you never give up. I want him to know you are okay." Cassidy's throat closed. "I think he already knows." "Yeah, but I want to tell him anyway." She kissed the top of Wren's head and left her to her writing. In the kitchen, she opened Rowan's journal to that night's entry, the one she had been circling for days, knowing what it contained, unable to face it until now. "The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less. I have not told Cassidy yet. I am not ready to watch her face when she hears the number. But I need to start preparing. For her, for Wren, for everything that comes after me." Cassidy read it 3 times. 6 months. Rowan had known exactly how much time he had left, and he had spent every remaining day preparing for their future. Writing letters, keeping the journal, making arrangements with Bridget. He had done everything he could to protect them from beyond the grave. And he had been right about her. Every word he had written about her strength, about her resilience, about her ability to rebuild from nothing. She had done exactly what he had believed she would do. She just wished he could see it. The call from Diego came on a Saturday morning 4 months after they moved to Phoenix. Cassidy had been expecting it. She had spent 3 weeks building her proposal between shifts at the construction site, writing it out longhand at the kitchen table after Wren fell asleep, refining every detail with the same precision she applied to a mortise joint. She had asked Hank for this meeting, had told him she had something to present to the council, and that it required every Western chapter president in the same room. He had not asked what it was. He had simply made the call. Jolene arrived at the house to stay with Wren. She had moved to Phoenix 2 months earlier, following Caleb, who had taken over management of the club's southwestern operations at Hank's request. Though Jolene would never admit it directly, the move had as much to do with a 7-year-old girl who called her JoJo as it did with any business arrangement. Cassidy drove to the Iron Reapers clubhouse on the eastern edge of the city with the folder on the passenger seat beside her and a steadiness in her hands that surprised her. The parking lot was full, every space occupied. Diego met her at the door. He was a broad man with sharp eyes and a handshake that communicated both warmth and warning simultaneously. "Follow me." He led her through the clubhouse to a back room. Inside, seated around a long table, were men Cassidy recognized from photographs in Hank's office, presidents from chapters across the western states. The leadership of the Iron Reapers, Men whose names she had heard spoken with a reverence that bordered on mythology. And at the head of the table sat Hank. Cassidy. He nodded. The floor is yours. Cassidy looked at him. Then at the 12 presidents seated around the table. 12 men who led thousands. Men whose approval was not given lightly and whose attention once lost was nearly impossible to recapture. Cassidy stood. She did not use notes. She did not need them. 8 months ago, I was living in a car with my daughter, she said. Homeless, desperate, invisible. Every system designed to help people like me failed us. Shelters were full. Social services were overwhelmed. Churches offered prayers, but not solutions. The only reason my daughter is alive and healthy today is because I made one phone call and 81 strangers decided I was worth helping. The room was silent, but I should not have needed 81 bikers to survive. There should have been a path, a real one, not charity, not pity, a structured system that connects homeless families with housing, employment, childcare, and medical support in a single coordinated effort. She placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Diego. Inside were incorporation papers, financial projections, a mission statement, and operational models she had designed based on everything she had learned from her own experience and from every family she had met in shelters over the past 2 years. The Dwayne Finch Foundation, she said, named after my father, a nonprofit dedicated to helping homeless families rebuild their lives, not through handouts, through the same thing that saved me. Opportunity structure and someone willing to say you are worth the investment. Diego opened the folder. He read for a long moment. Then he passed it to the president beside him, who read and passed it further. The folder moved around the table in silence. Cassidy continued. I am asking every chapter represented here to commit to annual funding. I have projected the operating costs for the first 3 years. With $500,000 in initial capital, we can launch in 4 states and scale to 12 within 5 years. Every dollar will be tracked. Every outcome will be measured. Transparent finances, professional staff, Jolene Garrison as executive director. She has the legal background and the organizational skill to build this properly. She paused. I am not asking you to do this because it will improve the club's reputation, though it will. I am asking because every one of you knows what it means to be judged by your appearance instead of your character. Every one of you has watched the world assume the worst about you based on a leather vest and a patch. This foundation is the proof that those assumptions are wrong, not in words, in action. The folder had completed its circuit. 12 presidents had read it. 12 faces looked at Cassidy with expressions ranging from impressed to moved. Hank spoke from the head of the table. His voice carried the rough edge of a man fighting to keep his composure. You heard her. Vote. 12 hands went up. Unanimous, the room erupted. Cassidy walked out of the clubhouse into a phoenix morning that painted the sky in shades of rose and copper, carrying a folder that contained the blueprint for her father's immortality. But the revelations of that season were not finished. 2 weeks later, Hank came to Phoenix. He arrived on a Saturday morning alone without the convoy or the fanfare that usually accompanied his movements. He knocked on Cassidy's door with an expression she had not seen before. Not the authority of a club president or the warmth of a surrogate father. Something deeper and more fragile. Can we talk? They sat at the kitchen table. Ren was at a friend's house for the afternoon. The house quiet in the way that only a child's absence can make a space feel both peaceful and incomplete. Hank pulled an envelope from his jacket. He set it on the table but did not push it toward her. There is something I have been carrying for a long time, he said. Something I should have told you months ago but could not find the right moment. Maybe there is no right moment. Maybe there is just the moment when you decide the truth matters more than the timing. He pushed the envelope across the table. Inside was a photograph. Old faded, the colors washed by decades until the image looked like a memory of a memory. A young man in military uniform standing beside a motorcycle, grinning at the camera with the uncomplicated confidence of someone who had not yet learned how much the world could take from you. Cassidy looked at the photograph, and something inside her went very still. She knew that face, knew it the way she knew the grain of oak and the weight of a well-made chisel and the sound of her daughter's laughter carrying through an open window. She knew the set of the jaw and the way the eyes crinkled at the corners and the particular tilt of the head that she saw in her own mirror every morning. That is my father, she whispered. Dwayne Finch. Taken in 1983. Hank's voice was barely audible. Look at the motorcycle. Cassidy looked. A Harley-Davidson, obviously cherished, polished to a gleam that reflected the young man's pride. And on the fuel tank, just visible in the faded photograph, a logo she recognized with a certainty that knocked the air from her lungs. The Iron Reaper's death head, no, Cassidy said. That is not possible. He was a construction worker. He built things. He came home with sawdust on his clothes and concrete under his nails. He was not. Your father was a member of the Iron Reapers for 12 years, Hank said. His voice cracked on the words. From 1979 to 1991. He joined when he was 19, rode with us through some of the hardest years this club has ever known. He was one of the most honorable men I have ever had the privilege of calling brother. Cassidy could not move. The photograph sat in her hands like a living thing, pulsing with a truth that was rewriting everything she thought she knew about the man who had shaped her. He left the year you were born, Hank continued. He told us he wanted to give you a different life. A life where your father's associations did not determine your future. He made us promise, every one of us, to never reveal his membership, to never contact you, to let him be whatever he chose to be in your eyes. Cassidy's hands were trembling. The photograph shook. He kept his promise to us, and we kept ours to him, for 34 years. Hank reached across the table but stopped short of touching her, letting her have the space to process what she was hearing. When you called about the saddlebag, something about your name felt familiar. Finch is not common. That night after we brought you to Bakersfield, I searched our records, and I found Dwayne's file. You knew. From the beginning. From the first night. And I have been carrying it since then, waiting for the right time. Hank's voice was thick with emotion he was not accustomed to showing. Your father was my brother Cassidy, not just in the club, in the way that matters. He stood beside me during the worst years of my life, and I stood beside him during his. When he left, it was like losing a limb. Cassidy picked up the photograph again, her father's face young and unlined, beaming. Beside a motorcycle that bore the emblem of a brotherhood she had been taught nothing about. Boudidao. The white roses, she said suddenly. The words came from a place so deep she did not know they existed until they were already in the air. At his funeral, there was an enormous arrangement of white roses. No card, no name. My mother was not there. She had been gone for years. I never knew who sent them. Hank nodded. His eyes were bright. That was us, our way of honoring a brother. We could not attend. We could not sign the card, but we could not let him leave this world without acknowledging what he meant to us. Cassidy pressed the photograph against her chest and cried. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from the place where a daughter keeps her father from the chamber of the heart, where the first and most important love is stored. She cried because the man who had taught her about integrity, who had shaped every decision she had ever made, including the one that had saved her life, had been an Iron Reaper, had been part of the very world that had eventually, 34 years later, opened its arms and caught her when she fell. She cried because the phone call from Barstow, the decision to return the money, the integrity that Hank and Caleb and 300 bikers had praised and celebrated, was not something she had invented. It was something she had inherited, passed down through blood and bedtime conversations, and a father's steady voice saying the same words night after night until they became part of her DNA. A person's integrity is all they truly own. Dwayne Finch had not created that principle in isolation. He had learned it here, among these men, in this brotherhood, and then he had carried it out into the world and planted it in his daughter like a seed that would not bloom for 3 decades. When the tears finally subsided, Hank spoke again. There is one more thing. Cassidy looked up. Her face was swollen and raw, and she did not care. The legacy patch, Hank said. He pulled a leather patch from his vest. It showed the Iron Reaper's death head with a silver border and the word legacy stitched beneath in careful lettering. This has been awarded 3 times in the history of our club. Only 3 times. It goes to the descendants of former members who have proven through their own actions and their own character that their blood carries the honor of the brotherhood. He held the patch out to her. Cassidy Finch, daughter of Dwayne Finch, you are not just a friend of this club. You are a legacy of this club. Your father's story is our story, and your future is our future. Cassidy took the patch. It was small in her hands, but it weighed more than anything she had ever held. More than the saddlebag, more than the $8,000, more than the folder containing the foundation documents. This patch was her father's truth, the truth he had hidden to protect her, the truth that had found her anyway, carried by a saddlebag and a phone call, in the specific gravity of a legacy that could not be denied. The dedication ceremony took place on a Saturday evening in the Phoenix clubhouse. 350 bikers from chapters across the western states filled the hall. Cassidy stood at the front in a clean shirt and her work boots in the legacy patch sewn onto a leather vest that Jolene had presented to her that morning. Hank took the stage. He told the story, all of it. The saddlebag, the phone call, the clubhouse, the custody battle, the foundation, and then the part that made 350 hardened bikers go absolutely silent. The story of Dwayne Finch, the brother who left to protect his daughter, the man who planted integrity so deep in his child's bones that it survived poverty and grief in 11 months of hell and still emerged strong enough to change the lives of everyone in this room. He held up the photograph. 350 men looked at the young face of a brother they had never forgotten. Cassidy Finch did not come to us by accident, Hank said. She came to us because her father's legacy brought her home. The room erupted. 350 voices raised in a roar that shook the walls. Bikers surged forward to embrace Cassidy, to shake her hand, to welcome her into a brotherhood that had been her birthright all along. Wren broke free from Jolene and ran to her mother. Cassidy lifted her into her arms. "Mama, you are famous." Wren laughed. "We are family. Wren, that is what matters." Hank leaned close and spoke so only Cassidy could hear. "Your father is watching, Dwayne and Rowan both. They are watching and they are so proud of you." The Dwayne Finch Foundation launched 6 months later. Cassidy continued her work as foreman during the day, but her evenings and weekends belonged to the foundation. She built the organization the way she built furniture, with precision, with care, with an insistence on quality that no shortcut could satisfy. The first family they helped was a single mother named Angela with 3 children. They had been living in a van for 5 months after Angela's husband was killed in a construction accident. The foundation provided housing assistance, job placement, and childcare support. Within 6 months, Angela was working full-time, and her children were enrolled in school. "I do not know how to thank you," Angela said, tears running down her face. "You do not have to thank me. Just pass it on someday. Help someone else when you can." More families followed, then more. The foundation grew with a momentum that surprised even Cassidy. Word spread through shelters, through churches, through social service agencies that had been overwhelmed and underfunded for decades. The Dwayne Finch Foundation became the resource of last resort for families who had exhausted every other option. The media noticed. A local news station ran a story about a homeless mother turned foundation director, and the image of Iron Reapers volunteering at shelters and building homes challenged every assumption the public held about motorcycle clubs. National coverage followed. Cassidy was interviewed on morning programs and podcasts and in magazines. She always told the same story: the saddlebag, the phone call, the bikers who saved her life. 3 years after finding the saddlebag, Cassidy stood on the stage of a convention center in Las Vegas. 3,000 people filled the hall. Social workers, nonprofit leaders, government officials all gathered for the annual Homeless Services Conference. But Cassidy was not looking at the audience. She was looking at Wren, now 10 years old, sitting in the front row between Hank and Jolene. Her daughter had grown tall and strong. The hollowness was gone from her face. The wheeze was gone from her lungs. She sat with the confidence of a child who knew exactly who she was and exactly who loved her. 3 years ago, Cassidy began, "I was a carpenter with a ruined life. My husband was dead. My business was gone. My daughter and I were living in a car eating crackers for dinner, sleeping under an overpass in November. I had lost everything except the one thing my father told me could never be taken." 3,000 people were silent. Then one morning I found a bag on the roadside with $8,000 inside, and every voice in my head screamed, "Take it." Every survival instinct I had told me to grab the money and drive and never look back. I held those bills in my hands and I could feel my daughter's future in them. Warmth, medicine, a bed. She paused. But there was another voice, quieter, steadier. My father's voice, telling me what he told me every night when I was a child. That integrity is not something you practice when it is convenient. It is something you prove when it costs you everything. She looked at Ren. I put the money back in the bag. I dialed the number inside. And that single act, that one decision made on a frozen roadside while my daughter coughed in the backseat of a car that was falling apart around us, that decision rebuilt my entire life. Not because I got lucky, because I got honest. And honesty, it turns out, opens doors that money never could. She stepped away from the podium. That phone call brought me to a family I never expected. A brotherhood of people the world told me to fear, who turned out to be the most generous, loyal, honest people I have ever known. They gave me a job. They gave me a home. They gave me back my belief that good people exist and that kindness is not weakness. Her voice grew stronger. Homeless people are not statistics. They are not failures. They are not invisible. They are mothers and fathers and children who fell through cracks in a system that was not built to catch them. They need what every human being needs, not judgment, not pity, opportunity. The chance to prove who they are when someone gives them the tools and the trust to try them. She looked across the sea of faces. I found a saddlebag with $8,000. I gave it back, and I received something worth infinitely more. I received a family, a purpose, a second chance. And now I spend every day of my life making sure that other families get the same chance I did. The ovation began slowly and built until 3,000 people were on their feet. Ren sprinted onto the stage and launched herself into Cassidy's arms. I am so proud of you, Mama. I am proud of you too, baby girl. Everything I have ever done, I did for you. That night back at the hotel, they read from Rowan's journal. Their Sunday tradition maintained, without exception, for 3 years the weekly ritual that kept his voice alive in their home. The entry was dated 2 weeks before he died. I do not have much time left. Days may be a week, but I am not afraid anymore. I am at peace. Because I know that Cassidy will take care of Ren. I know she will teach our daughter to be kind and honest and brave. I know that Ren will grow up to be an extraordinary woman. And I know that someday, somehow, Cassidy will find her way back to happiness. Cassidy's voice broke. Ren pressed closer against her. She does not believe it yet. She is too consumed by grief and fear to imagine the future. But I can see it. I can see her rebuilding. I can see her finding love again. Not romantic love necessarily, but the love of family, of community, of people who see her for who she truly is. I can see her becoming the woman she was always meant to be. Cassidy turned the page. And when that day comes, I want her to know something. I want her to know that I am watching, that I am cheering for her, that my love for her and for Ren will never ever end. The last lines blurred through tears. Be happy, my love. That is all I ask. Be happy and take care of our girl. And know that wherever you go, whatever you do, I am with you. Always. Cassidy closed the journal. Ren wiped her eyes. Daddy was really smart, was he not? The smartest person I ever knew. He knew you would be okay, even when you did not know it yourself. Cassidy held her daughter against her heart. He knew a lot of things I am still discovering. Like what? Like the fact that family is not about blood. It is about who shows up when you need them. That is what you always say. Because it is true. And because your father taught it to me, even from heaven. They sat together in the quiet room, holding each other, sharing their grief and their gratitude. Outside, the Las Vegas lights glittered against the dark sky like a field of earthbound stars. Cassidy thought about Dwayne, about the young man in the photograph, grinning beside a Harley with an Iron Reaper's patch on his vest, years before he would become a father, before he would leave the club to give his daughter a different life, before he would plant the seeds of integrity so deep in her soul that they would survive everything the world threw at her and still blossom into something that changed thousands of lives. She thought about Rowan, about his gentle hands and his careful handwriting and the letters he had written to a daughter who would read them for the next 11 years on every birthday, hearing her father's voice preserved in ink. She thought about Hank, about the giant man with steel eyes who had looked at a homeless woman in a parking lot and seen not a problem, but a person, who had opened a door because someone had once opened one for him. She thought about Ren, about the girl who had survived 11 months in a car and emerged not broken but burnished, stronger for the suffering. Kinder for the hardship, a child who told everyone she met that her family included hundreds of bikers and she loved every single one of them. Cassidy Finch had found a saddlebag on the side of a highway. She had given back $8,000 when giving it back meant her daughter would go hungry one more day. She had made a choice that should have cost her everything, and instead gave her everything she had lost and more than she had ever imagined. None of it had come from luck or accident. It had come from a single choice made in a frozen parking lot at dawn, a decision rooted in the teachings of a father who had carried the same honor in his own blood, who had passed it down through bedtime conversations in sawdust-covered hands, and the steady repetition of words that became the foundation of his daughter's life. A person's integrity is all they truly own. Cassidy held her daughter close and felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. Deeper than grief, deeper than loss, deeper than the 11 months of darkness that had tested her in every way a person can be tested. Her integrity had not saved her from suffering. It had not prevented the cancer or the bankruptcy or the homelessness or the cold nights when Ren's cough echoed through the Civic like a countdown. But it had done something more important. It had kept her whole. It had preserved the core of who she was through the worst of what life could do. And when the moment came when the choice presented itself in the form of a leather bag and $8,000, her integrity had spoken with her father's voice and guided her hand to the phone. That was the inheritance Dwayne Finch had left his daughter. Not money, not property, not tools or techniques, though he had given her those as well. He had left her the ability to do the right thing when the right thing felt impossible. And that ability had led her here. To a family built from strangers. To a foundation that bore his name. To a life that honored everything he had believed in. Cassidy Finch had lost everything. And then one choice at a time, one honest act after another, she had found it all again.